Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Lane One Making Waves. This week on the podcast, we have a senior sports dietitian for the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, Alicia Glass. Alicia has over 16 years of experience at the USOPC and over 10 years of experience within her current role. She's worked with athletes of numerous different disciplines, so swimming, track and field, ice hockey, equestrian, just to name a few. Within this conversation, we touch on very important topics within nutrition, such as fueling properly, no matter the type of practice and no matter the time of day, supplements, recovery. So, if you're an elite level athlete, if you're an age group level athlete, if you're a coach, or if you're a parent, this conversation has something in it for you. So, with that, let's dive in. So I wanted to take a second to thank Alicia for sitting down and speaking with me today. I know we're going to cover a lot of important topics when it comes to nutrition and swimming. But first, I'd like to start with your background and what first led you into the field of sports nutrition.
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you, Summer. I've been looking forward to this discussion. Love to share the work that we do at Team USA, but then also too, like, why do I do this job and what is it about it that I love so much? And I can honestly say I love the job. I feel extremely lucky. And so, my background, I'm a sport dietitian. I'm a registered dietitian. I have a master's degree in nutrition, and my background really started when I was pre-med. And that pre-med option came with a nutrition focus. And very quickly, when I was kind of halfway through college, I realized, you know what, nutrition is really where my interest is. So I decided to focus just on that. And I don't want to date myself or age myself too much, but back then, there really weren't that many sport nutrition programs. And so I kind of paved my own way. I pursued an internship in Colorado Springs. That was a coaching internship. And very quickly, I jumped onto a sport nutrition opportunity with that company. So, my background really, it was always kind of headed in the direction of sport, but I kind of paved my own way to do that and just happened to land in Colorado Springs, where the Olympic Committee is. And so
Yeah.
fast forward, here we are, and doing the job that I love because I grew up swimming.
Oh, wonderful. What events did you swim?
I used to say distance, but I was 500 in mile, but now I work
That's
with someone.
distance.
Yeah, the 10K in the open water like makes that 500 kind of be
That's
a.
a whole nother beast. That's just like ultra swimming is how I like to word that. But it is amazing how you kind of paved your own way. I know I don't want to date myself either, but when I was in college, sports nutrition, we had a nutritionist on staff, but it wasn't necessarily a key or vital piece to our performance. And so it's very, enlightening to see how it has grown and how we are now unveiling all of these things that we can do to perform better in the water with regards to nutrition. And you've been with the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee for 16 years, and you've spent just over a decade as the senior sports dietitian. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey and what your role looks like today?
Yes, yeah. So I actually, when I was first hired, I was the winter sport dietitian, and I was extremely excited just to be brought on in that capacity. I actually ran the exercise physiology lab in Colorado Springs as part of my job, and that was the door in, was part-time dietitian, part-time lab rat. Very quickly showed that there's enough athletes that are interested in nutrition that then became full-time sport nutrition. But like I said, I took the job that was offered, and I learned a whole lot about bobsled nutrition and everything that comes with that, and figure skating dietitian or dietetic work. But I mean, when the summer sport job opened up, I slid right on in there because that's really where I'm so excited to be. But I think one of the biggest changes in kind of what I do and my everyday is when I first started, I remember introducing myself and saying that I am the dietitian for USA Swimming and USA Track and Field athletes.
Mhm.
And at the time, like, they didn't have a dietitian before that, so I literally thought that was what I was doing. Um, and I think, I don't know, sometime within the last 10 years, but definitely within the pandemic, it was very, very quickly apparent that I can't be the dietitian for all tiered athletes, national team athletes. And very simply, it does a disservice to what nutrition is.
Mhm.
nutrition should be something that's paired with performance and training every day. And so, where I've come with my job as a senior dietitian, we've grown what we call a nutrition network, a Team USA network of dietitians. And I definitely still work with athletes. I love working with athletes. I mean, that's when I get so excited. To the point my husband asks, "How many athletes did you talk to today?" to gauge what kind of day I had, because talking to athletes is really what I love doing. But I oversee dietitians. We've chosen dietitians in geographical areas that make sense to where our athletes are. Very importantly, our NCAA dietitians we consider to be an extension of that network. So we have so many of our university students that then become post-grad athletes that are training in those locations. So working with the NCAA dietitians as much as we possibly can, doing site visits, having them come out to visit us, communicating on what we do at camps and competitions, they really are part of our network. And so that senior role is more just kind of being the umbrella that brings it all together, because a lot of the bread and butter and the magic happens every day at training, and that's where the other dietitians are. So I dabble a little bit in consultations. I advocate for nutrition in the Olympic Committee world, making sure that nutrition is considered, making sure that performance nutrition, not just clinical, oh, an athlete's already run down, fatigued, injured, and then we start talking about nutrition. No, it's what can we do to be proactive? What can we do to improve education and have athletes really buy into performance nutrition so that injuries, fatigue, illness don't happen?
Yeah.
So it's like I said, it's not as much athlete specific work, but it's still a little bit of some of that.
Yeah, well, it's amazing to see how much the field has grown. I mean, even within the past 5 years, and how many new faces are kind of brought in to help our athletes. And as you said, it is kind of a little bit specialized to each sport and to each athlete. Everyone needs something a little bit different. So having people in numerous locations, that helps a ton. You kind of spoke on it a little bit. I know one week is not comparable to another, but what does a typical day or week look like for you in Colorado Springs?
Yeah. I was in Colorado Springs for a while. I'm actually now in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yay.
So post, well, you know what I actually say, before it was cool, I went remote and it was
Yeah.
before the pandemic. I moved out here, and really it was easy for me to explain that, hey, our athletes are everywhere. And it's actually easier for me to fly to Florida, Texas, all these places that our athletes are based out of Atlanta.
Yeah.
It just happened that I met my husband who works in track and field in the sport world and he lived here. So now that I'm in Atlanta, I do a lot of consultations over the phone. That's the remote work that I do. Any given week, I'm traveling to visit athletes, so doing site visits, and the site visits are super important, not only for relationship building with the athletes, and that's the main reason I go. It's FaceTime with the athletes, but then also to talking to coaches and some of the other stakeholders in the sport outside of the heat and the stress and all the chaos that is World Championships and the Olympics.
Hmm.
In my role, I provide direct nutrition support at those meets and those competitions. But like I said, that's not the time to be talking about nitty gritties of nutrition. Nobody's changing what they're eating for breakfast the morning before the race at the Olympics.
Hmm.
If they're doing that, it's
We're like, hopefully not.
ideal. It's not ideal. So that's really the opportunity for me to get out and to really kind of have quality time with athletes. We've done things like cooking demos in their apartments, in their houses. We've gone grocery store tours. We've done a lot of really fun things outside of competition
Hmm.
during the visits. I sit on a lot of meetings. I had an intern recently tell me I was not prepared for the number of meetings. But I don't know. I think those are my opportunities when I'm working remote. Those are my opportunities for true collaboration. And within our organization, it's speaking up for nutrition. It's making sure all the dietitians' voices are represented. One of the things I was working on this week was already preparations for LA 2028, making sure the dining hall is prepared to supply however many ounces of protein that our athletes are going to be eating on a daily basis. So we're trying to advocate again for true performance nutrition so that, whether it be the dining hall in the village or the hotel that we're traveling to this summer, that they're prepared for what our athletes like to eat and what they need to eat to prepare for competition. So there's a lot of planning, there's a lot of logistics. Another thing I got to do later this week is make sure sure that USA Swimming has received all of the shipments of food product that we're going to be sending to Thailand and to
Mhm.
Singapore. We like to have some basic things that are just the predictable, everybody knows what various bars are and sports drinks and things, making sure we have the items that athletes are most used to using.
Yeah.
So it's kind of keeping the national governing bodies organized and having like that nutrition specific lens to make sure the athletes have what they need.
Absolutely. And I mean, from the outside looking in, that's so many tasks to kind of oversee and to be tasked with. I think there's a big misconception when you hear nutritionists that it's only, consulting and helping athletes get on track with regards to nutrition. But even listening, there's so much planning and so much more behind it. So that's incredible.
Yeah, I love it.
Kind of moving on to fueling for swimming specifically. So, swimming is a very special sport. We have early morning practices, we have practices later in the afternoon, weights, school. So, how should swimmers kind of be fueling around those demands?
Yeah. So I was actually talking to one of our national team athletes yesterday, and I was explaining to him like any other sport, swimmers would be considered endurance athletes. It doesn't matter what distance you're training for.
Mhm.
Most swimmers train for 2 hours at least one time a day. A lot of them do doubles. And then by the end of the day, they're training for 4, maybe 5 hours. No other sport does that. Like, think about it. No other sport really does that. Ultra running, maybe, marathon running during their heaviest trainings, maybe. But that sheer amount of volume that swimmers do, especially in the peak parts of their training season, you have to address the fueling and nutrition needs. And I think the unique part of swimming is that high volume aspect. And so I think a lot of the education that I provide athletes is if you're going to wake up early and do a double, they're waking up and burning calories immediately, which requires an increased emphasis to wake up and fuel to stay ahead of the catabolic or the muscle breakdown state. And so it just takes a lot of effort and planning and being proactive with making sure that you have the right foods available and fuel available from the very first minute you wake up on like thinking through what you're going to do. Whether it be preparing the night before or having, foods available for when you're walking out the door, it takes increased diligence, especially for the athletes that are doing those doubles.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And especially when you get into, high school and club level swimmers. I know in college, your classes are kind of spaced out. You have time to stop in the dining hall or, stop and get some snacks to eat. So, how would you address those needs for our high school and club level swimmers? What specific nutrition, what specific snacks and timing should they try to reach for throughout the day?
Yeah. I think especially for those high school swimmers, it's really important, and where a lot of my education focuses is having them think through their schedule
Hmm.
and plan for when they're going to have breaks in their day, or when are the opportunities for them to grab a snack or have a meal. A lot of times they're not really I mean, it's like you just go from one thing to the next. You don't really think about the back to back to back and being prepared because there's this transition of parents owning all of that,
Hmm.
or whoever it is that's schlepping you to practices, getting you from school back to practice. It's a lot of it is taken care of for you. But then in high school, I usually say when you get your car keys and you get your driver's license, at that point, you also have the full ownership and the accountability of really starting to think about fueling.
Hmm.
So, I mean, start going to the grocery store, figuring out why is mom buying what she is, and just being part of that planning process. Also too, like say, I encourage parents, like have the pantry have a part of it that is the performance snacks and give the ownership to the high school athlete to start going in there and saying, okay, I'm going to have a lift first thing. I
Hmm.
need a protein snack. And then I'm going to have a long pool workout at whatever time of the day. I need a carb snack. And so having it there and available is nice, but then giving the ownership of them to start thinking through it. So I think the biggest thing is reflect on what the entire day looks like and then figure out how you can proactively plan and be prepared for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the key piece there is also the ownership, because I know a lot of these swimmers are going to be graduating from high school and then going to college where it's like fair game. I mean, you could have whatever food that you wanted. You're fully in charge of going to the grocery store. You have dining hall where it's pretty much buffet style. And so having that guidance and having that knowledge and information early on in your high school years is huge and will help kind of guide you through your college years so you don't necessarily have that shell shock moment of, I can do whatever I want now.
Yes, yeah, for sure. Taking the ownership and being accountable is key.
hmm Um, so I know within swimming, we are also a very unique sport. I think track and field is also very similar, where you have different disciplines within the sport. And so, are there different nutritional needs for a sprinter versus a distance swimmer?
Yes, yes, for sure. And I think above that even is the training schedule and the type of training environment of each club team that athletes are part of.
hmm
There are various training groups that maybe do a lot of time in the pool. There are other teams that they do, yes, they have quality time in the pool, but they also do a lot of strength work and plyometrics, and they're in the weight room more. And it really each training group is unique in how they do it. Okay. And so I think kind of what's really helpful to me when we were talking about the site visits is going and seeing how our national team athletes are going through their days.
hmm
How intense is the pool workout? Do they have different, or how much time do they have in between the pool and the strength training sessions? And so that overarching is the big thing is, how unique is their training group? But then if you're looking at event by event, very simply, I mean, carbohydrate is the main fuels for a lot of the intensity that pool swimmers are engaging in. And so, depending on how many hours of training they're doing, that will dictate, do they need more carbs or less carbs? And
hmm
I don't like to look at, oh, I need to restrict carbs on the days I'm not doing all the yardage, but it might mean that you're changing where your carbs are coming from. So some of our sprint athletes, they need carbs, they're very important, but maybe they choose carbs that are more whole grain and have more fiber and they're more nutrient dense and they have they're more filling versus if you're talking about an athlete that's doing the two doubles that are each 2 hours long, and there's just a lot of volume, it's hard for them to stay on top of their energy intake. And
hmm
so their carbohydrate needs they're more refined carbs. They're the pastas and the white breads and the white rices because they need to be able to eat so much of those to get the calories that they need. So I don't like to look at it as like, oh, they're not allowed to eat more carb. It's more, no, let's choose carbs that are going to be more filling, provide carbs, but then give us a lot of nutritional value too.
Yeah.
Whereas some of those distance athletes, the carbs they choose, they're going to be able to eat 2, 3, 4 cups of whatever carb that is, and they'll be able to get the nutrients from the more refined carbs.
Yeah.
So carbs are it. Also, to kind of looking at what are their body comp goals. If they're
hmm
interested in building muscle, making sure that they have the protein and it's time to appropriately get to those goals that they're striving for. So those are just two of the things that really impact different event lengths.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I think when I was in college, I went to see our sports nutritionist, and we broke down what I was eating when I was practicing, when I was going to class. And I was very surprised because I thought I ate a lot. And she's like, no, you actually need to be eating more. You need to be eating, maybe a bagel with or half a bagel with cream cheese, like
Mhm.
30 minutes before practice. And I had no idea really the impact that it would have on my training until you kind of sit down and you chart it out.
Yep. I always say invest in your training by eating a little bit more carbs at times,
hmm
and then you'll be able to get more energy out.
Yeah,
So
I was very
invest
surprised.
it and feel better in the
Yeah.
thing that you're doing.
Moving on to kind of recovery and meet strategies. What are some of the key components of that post-practice recovery nutrition, and how soon should swimmers be aiming to eat after a practice?
Mhm. Yeah, so the key with recovery nutrition is acknowledging that the body's really good at absorbing nutrients and using carbohydrates and protein in the recovery realm. And so timing is important. When research first came out about this, we would say within the first hour after training. But then when we started talking that way, athletes were like, oh, I have an hour. I don't
Yeah.
prioritize nutrition, so I'll wait the full hour. No, the guidance now is as soon as possible. And it's just acknowledging after you finish a workout, your body's super efficient at absorbing the carbs and the protein at that time, and then it slowly decreases in terms of that efficiency. So right away, or as quickly as you can, so have the snack with you. But then depending on the type of workout, if it was more volume, carbohydrates are going to be really important to replenish so that you have energy or glycogen for the afternoon workout.
Mhm.
And then if it was like a more power workout, or you're doing buckets, or you're coming out of the weight room, making sure you have adequate protein to get the training adaptation from that type of training stimulus. So recovery nutrition, it's most important to just be prepared instead of waiting until whatever follows practice, and by the time you get home and you make your meal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And kind of on the other scheme of things,
Mhm.
swim meets are often very long. You know, you have prelims, you have finals, and you have very inconsistent times with your races. So, how can swimmers stay fueled in between their events?
Yeah. So I think most important thing about this is figuring out how much time do you really have. So I would say if it's anywhere between an hour, 2 hours or less, carbohydrates really are going to be your focus. And I say there's that range because various athletes have different comfort levels with eating food. Some people have nervous stomachs, they can't digest things very well. Others, they can eat anything and not have a problem. So it's kind of working with each individual athlete to have an understanding of what they can tolerate. And so carbohydrates, if it's not very long in between workouts, so a sports drink or eating a bar that's more carbohydrate based, or a banana or something that's just easy to digest. When you start adding proteins and fats into foods that you're eating in between sessions or events, it takes longer to digest, and there can be some stomach upset if you're trying to push yourself to a really high intensity while also trying to digest food. So
Mhm.
if you have more than 2 hours, having the real foods like a Greek yogurt is great because it's higher protein than regular yogurt. Pairing it with some granola. The granola could just be more carbohydrate ingredients, or adding in almonds and walnuts and getting some natural forms of dietary fats in there. That's going to help provide a lot of energy. If you have more than those 2 hours, maybe someone might be able to eat, I don't know, half of a sandwich, or Uber Eats and all of these food delivery places are fantastic. And really, that's where I've seen the biggest change in the NCAA is
Yeah.
dietitians. Like, it is fantastic what they do, but they'll have big like drops of food and meals from, some of the like really easy to get foods like Chipotle and Jimmy John's, and some of the stuff that's just dropped at the pool. I mean, all that stuff is fantastic. So, planning ahead, seeing what's available to you, but then I mean, having a cooler that has, like I said, sandwiches or cold pasta salads, things that they're easy to grab. But food safety is definitely an issue. So if
Yeah.
it's long, 3 to 4 hours, you probably should have it delivered fresh. You shouldn't be trying to kind of keep food too long, because
Yeah.
that's a reality too. Swimmers tend to get food poisoning more than my other athletes. I don't know why.
I have noticed that. I think everyone on my team at one point or another, they became ill and it turned out to be food poisoning. But it is very interesting because, obviously like carbs are the main source of energy and they're the main source of what endurance athletes need. But there are so many different ways that you can meet that requirement, and it ultimately does depend on the swimmer. So I know, for example, my brother, he could eat a whole foot-long sandwich like 2 hours before he swam, and it was
Yeah.
crazy to me because I was like, if I ate like that, then you would see it at the bottom of the pool.
Yeah.
So I got my carbs like a softer way, I'll say. So it is interesting to see the different dynamics even between swimmers who swim similar events.
One area of research that's very interesting is it focuses on the gut and its ability to be trained, and it's the sensation of fullness.
Hmm.
And basically, if an athlete doesn't feel like they can eat anything because they don't like how it feels in their stomach, you can actually slowly start increasing small amounts, and then increase that amount to the point where maybe it didn't feel good, but you can train your gut.
Yeah.
So a lot of marathon runners are looking into this, right? Because it's like, how do we get calories in? But it's starting low and increasing, and it's possible to train the
Yeah.
gut.
No, that's very interesting. And I mean, it's a common theme throughout this conversation, but how far research has come in this field in such a short span of time is just amazing. And it's only going to help our athletes, but also just the normal population as well.
Sure. Yep.
Moving on to kind of youth swimmers and family support, what common mistakes do you see a lot of teenage swimmers making when it comes to nutrition?
Yeah, the first idea or concept that kind of comes to mind on this is the idea that to eat, quote, healthy, an athlete needs to be, quote, restrictive. And
Hmm.
that comes often. And it's like, oh, I can't have dessert, or I can't have gluten, or I can't have dairy. And having this, they think that if they remove food groups or they remove, big categories of food options, that that's healthy. Um, and I think it's kind of the opposite way to look at it. And food and fueling is an opportunity to provide a lot of good nutrition while also delivering on energy needs. And so I think that that focus of every food choice is an opportunity to provide the nutrients that my body needs.
Hmm.
Sometimes the main focus is fuel. Sometimes the main focus should be adequate antioxidants because I know I'm in a high stress environment and colds are going around and I'm traveling. And yeah, you really need a lot of colorful fruits and vegetables. And so make sure you're working those into your food choices. So I think it's more, let's have more of a perspective of food as an opportunity, not something that you have to be restrictive with.
Yeah. And I will say, once you do kind of fall into that restriction trap, it can be very difficult to kind of get away from that and get out of it and not see certain foods as quote unquote good or bad instead of just different ways to fuel your body.
Yeah. I mean, I think an extreme, and I always reflect on this when I'm talking to athletes, like an extreme is our ultra marathon runners that we knew that know that do crazy things. I mean, they eat ramen. Why
Hmm.
do they eat ramen? They eat ramen because it's a very processed carb that's very easy for their stomach to digest when they're running for days at a time. It has salt, which replaces the electrolytes that they've lost through sweat. And then there's usually a protein source. So it's like all of that is packaged to meet the energy needs of that particular athlete. And that's an extreme. Athletes fall within that spectrum. What level of convenience is needed, what nutritional value is needed, and then what are they actually going to want to eat? Because if it doesn't taste good, they're not
Yeah.
going to stick with it for very long. So there's a huge spectrum on what athletes need to eat, but it's kind
Yeah.
of being more opportunistic.
Yes, I know, absolutely. And we touched on it a little bit earlier with regards to parents stocking the pantries and having swimmers take ownership. How else can parents support their swimmers' nutrition without being too controlling around what their child is eating?
Yeah. It's been very interesting. I have two small, soon to be swimmers. They're 2 and 6.
Yay.
It's just like this being a parent and just kind of, I don't know, having a panic moment of, well, how am I supposed to do this? How am I supposed to create a positive, a positive environment around food? And I think very simply, and I'm stealing it from another dietitian. I follow her on social. You provide the environment, you provide, they decide. So whatever foods you're going to choose to provide, they can decide what they want to have and what they maybe are going to explore, or maybe they don't want at that time. But it's creating the environment. And that's one thing that I've learned as a dietitian. All you can do is create the environment, and then the athletes can pick and choose what they want to participate in.
Hmm.
This age, and I've seen it develop since the time that I've been working with the national team and the Olympic teams. Like I remember in Rio, there was a certain athlete, I can say who, he did a lot of room service. And so we had created the menu and the meals to be very performance focused. I mean, we had dessert. I actually had another coach say we had to pull back on our desserts because there were too many. But like, I mean, it was enough for the team to, again, we created the environment they could choose how they wanted to navigate. But I mean, room service was the external, like athletes can escape and do that. But now, where are we today? You can have any food you want dropped at your door. It doesn't matter where we are and how much we've controlled the menu and thought through all the meals and the times and all. Athletes can do whatever they want. So again, just creating the environment. Parents, you provide whatever foods that it is, they decide what they want to participate in. And I think one of the things that kind of has rocked me is you can create this environment at home, but then as soon as they go to school and as soon as, they are over at a friend's house, I mean, it all goes to who knows. But you know what? Sometimes my daughter will come home, she'll say, I had a salad at lunch today, and I have to control my excitement. I'm like, that's
Yeah.
great. But it's just creating the environment.
Yeah, no, I 100% understand that. And like also, I know my parents did a great job at trying to have us explore new foods or at least try different things. And if we didn't like it, then that was fine. But at least kind of having a full plate instead of just the same things kind of over and over again, which I know we were very fortunate to have that in our lives. But my sister, she was very picky, which kind of leads me into my next question. So, do you have any strategies for swimmers who are picky eaters or struggle with eating before practices?
Yeah, so the ones that struggle before eating or eating before practices, I always just kind of direct them to drinking their calories, whether it be, I mean, you could start with something as simple as like a sports drink. That's going to give them the energy they need to get through that workout. What would be even better is like a homemade smoothie that it's not just drinking calories, it's providing a bunch of additional nutrients, fresh fruits, adding in protein from Greek yogurt, that kind of stuff. So that would be in terms of tolerance, just addressing, okay, they need energy. What are the ways you can get it? Drinking, it's going to be easier than trying to digest something. For picky eaters, again, I think it's more continuing to just expose them to other options, encouraging them to try it. But really, where we kind of get into trouble is where when we're starting to pressure them into, you have to do this or else.
Hmm.
Create the environment, let them participate however they want. And I have seen it where they'll surprise you. One day they're going to be adamantly no, but then the next day, and you can't make a big deal about it. The next day they're like, oh, that was actually pretty good. I liked it.
Yeah.
Can't have a reaction, just let it happen. I'm simplifying it. It's a struggle. It's with any part of parenting. You're wanting to do the best that you can while keeping them on track, but they're going to have to kind of develop and mature in the environment that you create.
Yeah, no, that's exactly how my older sister was. She was the picky eater amongst the three of us, and one day she would say no completely to her food, and then the next day, like it would all be gone. And it was interesting to watch as the younger sister and the one who wasn't picky with food, the one who always cleaned her plate. It's like,
Yeah.
don't you want that? Um,
The
but
other thing I realized very quickly is phases. They'll go
Mhm.
through phases of eating so many different things, and then they go through phases of being fairly closed off. And so it's just, again, create the environment and be confident in the environment that you've created.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Swimming is a sport, where you're constantly in the public eye. So how do you help young athletes develop that positive body image in such a competitive environment?
Yeah. So, talking about body image, it's more kind of looking at like what are the end goals? And I think that's what I love about my job is our athletes have the end goal of performance,
Hmm.
reminding them that the goals are what they can physically achieve and what they look like is not the performance marker.
Hmm.
I've had conversations with some of our national team where I say, you have the gold medal body. You have that. That is you. You should not be looking to anyone else because you are high performance.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's an awesome thing. I think also too, like we've had some national team athletes they're like, oh, I don't want to be big. Well, take the opportunity and the time to educate them on, going to the weight room and lifting is not what's going to make you big.
Hmm.
Um, and just, I think being calm and taking the time to explain how a lot of our areas work and how they work together. So I have a really good working relationship with the strength coach that works with USA Swimming and kind of talking through, hey, this athlete has some concerns. Let's sit down together and discuss and maybe not have it feel so overbearing or too
Yeah.
much, but it's more, let's have the conversation, just openly a conversation. What are our goals? And talk through some of their concerns. But body images, I feel very lucky that sports psychology, mental health, and mental health providers, they are part of our high performance team.
Hmm.
And so we all are very coordinated in our approach. And I feel like the athletes get a good amount of support in that area.
Yeah. And it can be difficult, sometimes just being in the public eye and having that comparison trap. Social media has, for good or for worse, it's here to stay. And so sometimes it can be difficult, especially as athletes, comparing yourself to someone else who may swim the same event as you, but having someone to kind of help you take that step back and realize you are fueling your body and this is what you need. And you shouldn't compare yourself to someone else because you are you, and that is important. And so it's great to hear, the relationship that USA Swimming has with strength and conditioning, with nutrition, with sports psychology, because it is so holistic. Everything works together. And if one piece is missing, it's easy to see where that piece is missing.
Yeah, and I think it's always interesting to me, like we're working with athletes that have specific body comp goals in mind. A lot of times those goals they haven't been openly discussed
Hmm.
by with key influencers. So like I mean, we recently had one of our track and field athletes who had a certain race day weight in mind, and his coach had no idea that he was striving for that. And it was significant. It was like 10, 15 pounds down.
Oh,
And
wow.
where did this athlete come with this number? Like
Hmm.
and coach didn't think that was performance. I mean, and it was more, it hadn't been discussed. So again, providing support around the athlete for them to feel like they can openly talk through what they think is most performance ready.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think doing, the site visits is so important because it gets those athletes comfortable talking to you. It's easy to, send a text and send an email, but when you're talking face to face with an athlete or with someone you're helping, it's that level of comfortability for them to come to you, and it makes everything so much easier.
Yep, for sure. Yep.
Swimming is very interesting. We're a water sport. We're constantly in the water, yet I do know that most swimmers are, hydration is very difficult for us. So what are your go-to tips to keep swimmers properly hydrated?
Yeah. So very simply, urine should look more like lemonade, less like apple juice. But that reflection, like having athletes realize every time you go and you go number one, you should be looking at what it looks like. And that's your call to action. It should always
Mhm.
look more like lemonade, less like apple juice. I also provide the directive of if you're going to carry a water bottle around, it should not be full for very long. You should be chiseling away at how much water is in there all day and filling it up. When we travel to some of the hot places, like this summer, going to Thailand and Singapore, I mean, those are really hot places that also leading into those have pretty long days of travel.
Mhm.
And indirectly, when athletes are traveling, they're not proactively hydrating as well because they don't want to have to go to the bathroom or they're taking long naps on the airplane or whatever the case is. So just kind of reflecting on what is a normal or an appropriate fluid intake that should be a general goal and have them feel like they have a plan to get through that goal.
Mhm.
So I a lot of times will like at the end of a practice, if I'm on site doing my site visits, kind of say, okay, so you showed up with this really awesome water bottle. It's still full. Like what do we, so it's just, having them reflect on what's the goal and then how I'm going to get to it. So, these athletes are goal driven. So I think it's one, if you address it one time with numbers and kind of work through a plan, they then kind of know what they need to do.
Yeah, and it's very easy to overlook, especially in swimming when you have maybe 5 seconds on the wall, 10 seconds
Mm.
here or there. And so, just having someone point it out to you, hey, your water bottle is still full. Sometimes you're not even thinking about it. And you're like, oh my gosh, you're right. I really should have finished that a long time ago. I know
Yeah.
we weighed ourselves before practice one time, and
Mhm.
then we completed practice, and then we weighed ourselves after. And it was so interesting to see how much weight was actually lost just in the span of the 2 hour practice.
Yep. Yep, for sure. And I think simple ideas like that, like just like having the concept of exactly what does this look like,
Mhm.
can be super helpful. The drug testing when they come and they do the urine specific gravity, having athletes have an understanding what those numbers mean. And if it's a 1.03, like that's severe dehydration, just for your awareness. So when you showed up for that drug test, or they showed up to drug test you, that's what that number meant. And so let's reflect on what led us here. What time of day was it? What did we do the day before? Where were we? And having them feel more educated. And I think the other thing that I try to do, instead of just say hydrate and not have much explanation, I like to give them the explanation of what does water do in the body and have them reflect on, oh, the more dehydrated I am, my heart actually has to work harder to pump the same amount of blood. And so the intensity that I'm pushing myself to in a workout, it's harder if I'm dehydrated. that right there, it's like, okay, I want to be hydrated.
Yeah, I want this to be easy.
Yeah, so the workout's not so hard. Also too, like cognitive processing, the more hydrated you are, the clearer your head,
Hmm.
mood is better. So just, yeah, explaining some of those things that hydration does, and that helps
Yeah.
athletes remember to do it.
Yeah, no, everything is so holistic. And you touched a little bit on travel and how that can kind of affect nutrition. So, what is your approach to travel nutrition for meets, especially when swimmers are away from their usual food routines or there are certain things, you can't take through the security checkpoints?
Yeah. Yeah, so for our national team, they're traveling internationally. I know a lot of club swimmers, they might just be driving down the road 2, 3, I don't know, maybe they're flying.
Mhm.
But usually their travel days are a lot shorter. So if we're talking about what we do for our national team, our recommendation is to have some higher protein snacks in your bag. A lot of times airplanes will have carbohydrate snacks. That's usually not where you have to invest the time or the weight and space in your luggage. And then usually that's in the form of like nuts and seeds and nut butters. They don't require refrigeration either. So that's something that's good. Also too, when athletes are going to foreign countries, I advise that they pack protein in their bags, in their checked bags, so that they have at least 1 or 2 meals that are going to get them through maybe a meal that they went through the line at whatever the team room is. And if they didn't find a familiar food or, they didn't like the look of whatever in the foreign country we're in, they have something to fall back on. My
Mhm.
job as a dietitian, though, too, is we travel with whey protein powders. I travel with packets of chicken and packets of tuna, and I'm going to the grocery store most days, and I'm navigating through and reading labels in different languages and really making sure the athletes have what they need.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of the fallback. And I'm gonna take the words from Elizabeth Beisel. One of our trips, she said, "Wow, sport nutrition used to be a bag of power bars.
Yeah.
Now we have you, where I go out and I navigate it all. I spend the time figuring it out to make sure the athletes have what they need."
No, and that's very true. I mean, I remember just growing up, all we had was really power bars, and that was kind of the staple for swimmers. And now it's so much more than that. You have, teams on deck with so many fruits, so many carbs, and it's amazing, as I said, to see how far it's really come.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I know we're not moving into an era, but there are more and more supplements and more talk about supplements and how they can help and also how they can sometimes hurt. So what's your stance on supplements for swimmers? When are they useful and when can they become risky?
Yep. So a little disclaimer, I did work at USADA for a couple of years before
Hmm.
OPC. And so with that, I mean, I came into my job with a high level of risk in mind with dietary supplements. It's a crazy industry, so much marketing with very little benefit. And so, kind of over the years, obviously obviously there is some benefit to dietary supplements depending on the supplement that you're talking about. Okay, you could be talking very simply about whey protein. We just talked about it. If you're in a place where convenience to a protein source is an issue, yeah, whey protein can be a good thing to include, especially if it means that or no protein at all. You can then start looking at some of the higher risk supplements. In our world, pre-workouts they're a reality. A lot of people are thinking they need a pre-workout. Well, the risk of a stimulant and a banned stimulant is real in a pre-workout. So going back to your original question, what's my stance? Very simply, I say you have to earn the right to talk to me about supplements. And that means we've done our initial consultation. We've talked through all the foods that you're eating. We've talked through where in your diet you can make improvements. We've talked about the timing of your food, your, preparation and planning that's gone into your day of fueling. Like we've talked through all of those nutrition, food first, parts of proper fueling. That's really where you're going to have the biggest benefit.
Hmm.
Um, that's where energy is. That's where energy balance is. And that's the long-term approach to nutrition to have. I like to say dietary supplements, they're not even the icing on the cake, they're the sprinkles on top of the icing. Like there's like tiny little bit of like maybe some benefit to some of those things.
Hmm.
You should be looking at everything else first. So earn the right to talk to me about it. And then we talk through specifically what might be beneficial for an athlete and is the benefit worth the risk?
Yeah. No, absolutely. What role do coaches play in fostering healthy nutrition habits on a swim team, especially at that age group level?
Yeah. They have a huge part in the role that nutrition plays on an athlete and their development in the sport. They're role models.
Hmm.
Uh, and I mean, I don't want to say that they have to take on a lot of the responsibility, but the reality is the athletes see what they do and they see the lifestyle that they're engaging in. And
Hmm.
so that is an opportunity, or just acknowledging that is an opportunity for them to think through, you know what, during the 2 hours that I'm on the pool deck, I'm not going to bring my fast food onto the pool deck because the athletes see it. And then
Yeah.
it's like, oh, that's what they eat. I eat that too.
Hmm.
So I think there is a level of engaging and buying into the idea that food is important and fueling is important and nutrition is important, and that has its place in developing good habits for an athlete. So
Yeah.
I think it plays a huge part.
Yeah. And especially, like in our youth, we're so impressionable. We look up to our coaches, we look up to our parents. And so, we base what we eat sometimes more often than not off of what they're eating. And so having those positive role models in your life are very important, especially from such a young age.
Yeah. Well, and then on the flip side too, we talked about not having a restrictive approach to fueling. If
Hmm.
coaches are suggesting that they live in this restricted environment and in a bunch of different ways, like if it's too much, eventually they're going to be exposed, like I said, go to the neighbor's house or go off to college or change environments. And does the athlete really have an empowered feeling of how they can then identify in the new environment what their eating habits are?
Yeah. Sometimes you're trying to do your best, and sometimes it can have a negative effect, even when you're trying to have that positive effect. And so, as you said, just giving them the tools they need to succeed so they can make those choices, especially later on in their life.
Right.
And so, just one last question for you. If you could leave swimmers, coaches, and parents with one key message about nutrition that supports both high performance and long-term health, what would it be?
Yeah. We've actually already said it. Nutrition is an opportunity.
Mhm.
Fueling is an opportunity. Food choices are an opportunity, and it's an amazing opportunity. I love, and what makes me so happy is to see athletes that cook, and then next level, the athletes that have their own gardens, and the ones that like have found enjoyment and like a sense of fulfillment with food production or food preparation, food acquisition, and then socially using food as a way of coming together
Mhm.
and have it be a positive opportunity. And I really think that'll apply not only to fueling as an athlete, but then long term. Um, all of I tell athletes this when we first meet is everything that we talk about are building blocks that then they can tap into when they're 50, 60, 80. Like all those concepts are still going to hold true.
Mhm.
So I think it's an amazing area for athletes to grow in and then just continue to mature throughout a lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely. And the knowledge and, having yourself and everyone else on staff as mentors to help kind of guide our athletes is incredible and it's amazing. And so just a big thank you for all of the work that you're doing and all of the work that you're gonna continue to do for our athletes. And I'm really excited for LA 2028. I'm gonna have to ask the athletes now what was in the dining halls.
I know. Yeah. Well, they'll tell you about Paris. So,
Yep, I've heard a few stories.
so yeah, LA 2028. Let's go.
Yeah, but thank you again for just taking the time. I know this conversation is going to help so many out there.
Thank you, Summer.
All right, everybody. Well, that's a wrap on this week's episode. A huge thank you to Alicia for taking time out of her busy schedule to sit down and walk us through what proper nutrition looks like so that everyone can compete and also feel the best. This episode has key tricks, whether you're an elite athlete, whether you're an age group athlete, or whether you are retired from the sport. Nutrition is something that you take with you through the rest of your life. As always, a huge thank you to the International Swim Coaches Association and also Swimming World Magazine. Without their help, this podcast would not be possible. Please, please, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and also if you want to stay up to date on all things Lane 1 Making Waves, follow us on our social media platforms where we will post behind the scenes content and also short clips from every episode. So with that, I will catch you all next time.